front line right now, I think is actually on a cutting edge because we can't ignore what we've been through the last 2 years. But even to be honest, it was before even 2 years ago that I particularly was working with students that were falling through the cracks. That's been my background the last 20 plus years now, probably more like between 22 and 25, because I think the 90s was 10 years ago still, but apparently it wasn't 10 years ago. And so I've been working a lot with young people, youth at risk. Actually started my work in East Vancouver, working with drug dealers and gang members and kids that living in poverty and addiction. And I remember being so new to this world. I mean, I grew up in Calgary, left Calgary when I was 19, moved out there, went to college, graduated, and going onto those streets of East Vancouver was such a shock for me. And all I knew was that I needed to be open, needed to be curious, needed to lean in and just kind of learn and listen. At the same time, I was taking a hip hop class and I started to teach these gang members hip hop because I was trying to figure out how to relate to them. I mean, I'm only 5 feet tall. I know I look taller online, but I'm not a tall girl. And I'm pretty young. And like at that point, I'm 22 years old. I've got no experience. And so started to relate with them through hip hop. And what was interesting was that from there, I actually started working in the school system in East Vancouver and discovered a whole way to teach mental health and resilience to young people through breakdance, if you could believe that. Because I know that's what you thought when you saw me. You thought, hey, now there's a gangster right there. So I remember going into, these East Vancouver schools and again, just getting really curious, like, why are these kids suffering? I mean, you have to understand this was 97, 98. So this isn't new. But if you ask me if it's gotten worse, I would say 100% yes, it has gotten worse. Anxiety, depression, behavioral issues, mental illness, these things have gotten worse. Now, in 2006, I moved to Calgary and started to take my mental health and resilience work through dance into public schools here. And it was very interesting because there I was in affluent schools, middle class schools, and lower income schools. And it blew me away that the same anxiety, the same depression, the same conduct disorder, the same drug dealing, the same everything was in the affluent schools, it was in the middle class schools, and it was in the lower income, all three. And this started to tell me that mental health issues, they can be there. They're no respecters of persons. You can be educated or not. You can be married for a long time and still together or not. You can have a lot of money or not. You can have faith or not. It doesn't matter. Mental health concerns are hitting everybody. It's no respecters of persons. But for me, nothing hit home more than when it hit my own house. In 2006, my oldest son was born, and by the age of 6, we had to get him diagnosed with anxiety, depression, oppositional defiance disorder, which I don't believe in, and I'll tell you why in a few moments, ADHD and autism. And you have to understand that if somebody's getting a diagnosis for their child at age 6, it's because there was something seriously going on that made that parent think, oh my goodness, this is not quite what I expected. This isn't normal, if I could use that word. And I remember, my son was 3 years old and I would tell him, go get your shoes on. Go get your shoes on. Go get your shoes on. I would say it 8 times. That's saint status. I'd say it so calm. But by the 9th time, I was losing my mind. I was yelling. By the 10th time, I'm the reason why my children know what curse words are. By the 12th time, I'm resorting to name calling. What's wrong with you? Why can't you just get your shoes? And this wouldn't happen just once a day, but this was numerous times a day. And our son was never quite happy. He was always grumpy. He was always oppositional. He was always just upset. He wasn't easy to deal with. And when we got the diagnosis, which by the way, costed us $5,000. So today, if you want to get help and if you need help, if you realize that you need help right away, it's going to cost you some money, which is unfortunate, isn't it? I don't know if any of you on the call have ever been through that process, but if you want to get an assessment for free, you're going to be waiting a couple of years. We We didn't feel we had a couple of years. And so we paid quite a significant amount of money to get this diagnosis. But even then, great. Now we know. Now we know he has a diagnosis of anxiety and depression, opposition, ADHD, autism. Great. Now what? And we would knock on pediatricians' doors, psychiatrists' doors, doctors' doors, every door we could think of, and doors would just slam in our face, and we didn't have any extra money to spend. And so again, we were back to square one, just not knowing how to raise this precious boy. Now, I want to let you know that this son of mine now, my oldest son, is 15, and I also have an 11-year-old, which is very interesting because my 11-year-old is the exact opposite of what I'm going to share with you today. Today, I'm going to share with you things that will help any child move through anxiety. I'm going to give you tools as parents to help you navigate systems with a depression and anxiety, executive functioning, and I'll explain that with your child. But I do want to let you know that this isn't going to be easy, because I thought that it would just be, here's the top 5 ways to manage my son's anxiety, 1, 2, 3. And I'll tell you, it's been quite a journey. It's been a brave journey. It's been a long haul journey, but we've seen some real success. And these were things, most of these things I'm going to teach you tonight, I know these things because I'm a mental health professional. And I want to share that with you so that you can just let yourself off the hook, because sometimes we think, if I just knew more, if I had a PhD in psychology, maybe I could parent my child today. I just want to let you know that knowledge is not enough, because I had knowledge. And so I just want to tell you that that's probably not going to solve anything. I'm going to share with you tonight the real grit of what it takes to bring our kids out of this. And I want to let you know just right off the top, because everybody thinks, oh, medication and counseling, that must be the answer. I'm going to tell you that only accounts for 20% of your child's mental health journey if they're struggling with anxiety and depression. Tonight, I'm going to teach you the 80% that's left over. And the reason why our kids are suffering is because we are relying so heavily on just medication and just counseling. And I'll tell you, it's only 20%. I believe it's an important 20%, but it's not the full picture. It's only part of it. So let me share my screen here. I'm going to warn you, I'm not very technologically sound, but oh, look at that. I actually made it work. That is neat. So where we're at right now, well, it's very interesting. I work a lot right now with the adults who hold the kids. And I'll tell you, the adults are tired. Parents are tired. Parents are exhausted trying to figure out what's going on with their kids. We don't seem to realize that it's more than just 1 out of every 5 students or children struggling with anxiety or depression. It's not just that, because there's 1 out of every 5 students that are struggling with anxiety and depression on a high level, but then the rest of the 4 of them, they're still in that mental health spectrum of what we could call languishing. They're not thriving. Maybe 1 or 2 out of 5 are thriving in this moment. The rest are kind of in the middle there. And so we have quite a spectrum of mental health. We have teachers who are exhausted. I spoke at our Calgary Teachers Convention this year, and Edmonton. And I had a self-care strategies that work. I have been teaching this seminar in Teachers Convention for 8 years, and I'll get maybe 50, 60 people in it. This year, I had over 300 teachers in that seminar because they are just burned out. And so what we have right now is we have exhausted adults. We have exhausted parents trying to help exhausted, stressed out, anxious, depressed kids. And it's interesting, I read a stat that 70% of an adult's day is spent in the back of their brain. Now, what is that? Well, the back of your brain, like right back here, it's where we react. It's not where we're creative. It's not where we can respond. It's where we are reactive. We are in fight or flight. We are on edge. 70% of our day, statistically, is lived in the back of our brain as adults. where in a place in our brain where we only were supposed to live momentarily. We were only supposed to live in certain spurts of our day. We are now living most of our day back there. And we wonder, oh, I wonder why our kids are so stressed and anxious. It's because the adults are stressed and anxious. And you're going to learn that it's very important to manage my own inner world and my own mental health in order for the health of my child's brain to be able to flourish. We'll get to that. It's important to know that where we're at right now, a lot of people have tons of ideas. It's the screens, I tell you, it's the screens. Our kids, they're on social media, they're on video games, they're on iPads. And, you know, I would love for you to imagine with me a big bowl. And we're going to make a recipe. And there's a bunch of ingredients. And yeah, sure, you know, the screens might be one ingredient that goes into this bowl of why our kids are suffering mentally right now. It's one thing. Some people try to make it the thing. I'm going to tell you, it's one thing. A lack of a village is another one thing. Some people try to go, there's no community, there's no village, I don't have any extended family, I don't have people who are surrounding me right now to help me with these kids. Okay, that's another ingredient that's going into the bowl. Our mental health care system is flooded. Try to get an appointment. Just try to get an appointment. I called up our pediatrician for an appointment. You know what she told me? I'm booking into January 2023, friends. That's a problem. Let's put that in there. It's one ingredient. The education system, it's not working right now for kids that are falling through the crack. That's another ingredient. It's not the main thing. It's one thing. There's too much gluten in our diet. The kids are exposed to chemicals, whatever. That's another ingredient. And if you mix all of those together, you'll see that our kids are not doing well. Our kids are sick because our culture is sick. And I would say that if one or two kids here and there were anxious, I would say, you know what, it's probably you. Or in my case, you know, my son's struggling, it's probably me. But I'm just going to say right now that when you have an entire generation that's suffering, it's because an entire generation is being infiltrated by a culture that is not doing well. Because our youth and our children mirror back for us, how are we really doing? Are the things that we have set up as adults really working? Well, according to our kids, it's not working. Living stressed out lives isn't working. Having a lack of a village isn't working. Having systems that wrap so much red tape around people, they can't even help anybody, is a problem. We have a lot of issues to work on. And if you think about it, you could get really discouraged. But I'm going to give you tonight a lot of hope, a lot of empowerment to know that there's so much more in your hands than you know. Even though this is where we are, we don't have to be here. So I remember when my son was 8 years old. So he got his diagnosis at age 6, but by age 8, my son was suicidal. And that's my kid. That's my son. Someone with a mental health background, someone who's been married for 23 years, somebody who is a good citizen, somebody who is working hard, has an education. My kid is suicidal at age 8. That is grade 3. That is so young. And it's interesting, as I've told my story, more and more people come out of the woodwork telling me, oh, my child is 8. My child is 7. My child is 9. Teenagers. People come out of the woodwork and say, my child was thinking of suicide too. Now, what's interesting is that depression for my son did not show up as sadness. It actually showed up as rage and anger, throwing things, swearing at me, that opposition. And let me just go, just as an aside, share with you why I don't believe in the diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder. First of all, these are the kids that I've worked with for over 20 years. It's the defiant ones, the prickly ones, the ones that are not just going to go with the flow. And I'll tell you, they're an absolute gift to society. Because who are they? Well, they're Steve Jobs, they're Elon Musk. They are the people who reform society. They're just really hard to parent. And so when it comes to opposition, if you tell a child you are oppositional, you are defiant, you have a disorder, anyone with that oppositional nature is going to dig their heels in, look at you and go, yeah, you haven't seen anything yet. And what's interesting is that I've seen with oppositional students, teens, kids, that they're not always oppositional. There's certain environments where they actually become quite cooperative. So if opposition was true, then you would see them oppositional all the time. Now, some of you might say, well, I have an oppositional child, and they are oppositional all the time. And I could say that because my son was oppositional all the time, but with me. But with other people, he wasn't, which means that he did know how to adapt. I like Dr. Gordon Neufeld. He wrote an incredible book called Hold On to Your Kids, and he calls opposition counter will. And I like that because, yeah, we're not denying that they are certainly, got wills of steel, but opposition it just puts them in such a negative space. And it really creates a barrier. At least that's what I've noticed. So my son was quite oppositional. I didn't think this was depression as soon as he mentioned suicide. And so we took him to the hospital where he stayed for 3 weeks. And during our time there, the psychologist would meet with us. And one day she brought me aside and she says, "What do you do when your son is throwing fits of rage?" I said, "Well, I send him to his room. And I tell him, you can't come out until you're going to be a good boy." I mean, that's how I was raised. I'm a child of the 80s. Anybody else, any other children of the 80s in the room? I mean, I wasn't just sent to my room. I was slapped upside the head while I went to my room. I thought I was doing better. But then she said this, "Oh no, you never send the hurting away from you. You bring them closer." And I wish I knew what the heck she was talking about in that moment. I was thinking in my head, look, I am desperate. I have had no help for 8 years. Somebody put this kid on meds. Somebody get him a counselor and don't send him home until he's fixed. So I remember him coming home 3 weeks later, and guess what? He had a counselor and he had medication, because apparently sometimes that's what it takes. It takes a crisis to get help, and that is a problem. And I thought life was going to be good. And then that first fit of rage hit again. And I remember feeling so desperate, so full of despair. Like, are you kidding me? Medication? Come on, I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for these answers. And you mean to tell me that this didn't even work? But then I remember what she said, bring him closer. So I thought, oh, okay, maybe that means give him a hug. And I should know better. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to hug somebody who's like really like right at the moment, like it's like you asked for it, right? Or has anyone ever tried to hug you when you're like, don't touch me, right? It's like, whoa, like you come here, right? We do not want to do that. So I learned very quickly, okay, it doesn't mean give him a hug. So I removed all the sharp objects in the room and I just sat there. I just sat there. I didn't know what to do. Bring him closer. I just stayed in the same room and sat there. And while I was sitting there, I thought, well, maybe I should say something. And so I said, "Son, you belong in our house. Nothing's going to break our connection with you. We love you so much." And then these words came out of my mouth. "I'm not trying to change your behavior." And then I almost choked on my spit because that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to change his behavior. I wanted the rage to stop. I wanted the chaos to stop. But I knew that there was something very powerful in what I had just shared. I knew there was something on that. And this is where I learned the first thing I want to teach you tonight is as I sat there with him in his mess and just allowed him to feel, this is what I learned. Peace in my heart means peace in my home. As he would rage, the rage in me would just stir up. And that's because we have mirror neurons in our brains. Our brains are literally wired for connection. So I don't know if you've ever been in a room, if somebody's in a mood and you feel them, you catch their vibe, That is the mirror neurons in your brain connecting with the mirror neurons in theirs. And there's this interesting concept in mental health called differentiation. Your mood does not affect mine. And that is hard. It's hard to go against our actual neurobiology of wanting to connect with someone else. But one of the things that I realized, that if I was going to manage my son's anxiety, I was going to need to manage my own first. Because what I didn't realize, and what maybe I didn't even want to accept, was that I'm the adult and my son needed me to be a strong pillar for him when he was feeling out of control. If I'm out of control, then he's like, we really are screwed here, right? He needed to know that mom could handle his big emotions. And at first, I trust me, I didn't buy this, because I'm thinking this kid just needs discipline. And yeah, I had to have parameters around what he could or could not do. But like I said, I removed the sharp objects. I would remove myself. I set parameters, but then I just sat there. And while I sat there, I allowed myself to begin a journey, a very brave journey of making sense of my own story. What's interesting is that we don't realize that we've been given an emotional suitcase. You know, your grandparents, they packed this emotional suitcase and they didn't even know they had this emotional suitcase. But in that emotional suitcase might be, you know, a lot of hard work and grit. Maybe they were a part of the Great Depression. You know, they had discipline, they had integrity, but maybe they also had a bottle of whiskey in that emotional suitcase because life was hard. Maybe there was even a little bit of adultery. Maybe there was other things that they weren't proud of, but they packed it, they close it up, they pass it on to your parents. Your parents don't even know that there's an emotional suitcase, but they open it up and they decide, okay, you know what, we do not want alcoholism in our house and we're going to get rid of this. But they pack their own stuff, both good and bad, into that emotional suitcase. And guess what? Then they pass it on to you. And you and I, we don't even know we have an emotional suitcase, and we've opened it up. And now we have a choice to make. What story are we going to pass on? What emotional suitcase are we going to pass on to our children? Dr. Gabor Mate, one of my favorite people on this subject of talking about how trauma impacts mental health. What is mental health? The health of your brain. Trauma impacts mental health if we don't make sense of our story. You can't change the past. You can't change your traumas. You can't change what decisions people made for you in the past, but you can decide to make sense of it. And what happens when we make sense of it is, before we make sense of our trauma, it's like a tornado all around us. And we feel emotionally chaotic. We feel mentally chaotic. But as soon as we make sense of that story, it's like we hold it. It's been brought out of chaos. It's been named. And now it can be tamed and it can be rewritten. And this is not fluff. This is not just like, oh, that sounds really interesting. No, this is actual neuroscience. You can read research paper after research paper. Neurologically, you make sense of your story. This is how you get peace, or you are able to manage your emotions. You see, before I was an emotional wreck. I was an emotional roller coaster. I was a Katy Perry song. You're hot, then you're cold. You're yes, then you're no. You're in and you're out. You're up and you're down. What mood is mom in today? And I didn't realize that I was lugging around this massive emotional suitcase that I just never made sense of. And you have to understand, I don't even have big traumas in my life. I mean, my mom fled domestic violence when I was a baby, but I don't personally remember that. I'm sure it's a part of some of the neurological wirings in my brain, but it certainly isn't something that I think of a lot. But the things that I had to make sense of were things like the fact, as a child, I never really felt heard or understood. Emotions were always shoved under the carpet. Anger, oh, hide that, get that over there. Sadness, you push that underneath the rug. And even overly excited, which I always was shameful. And so I learned to not know how to handle big emotions. And now there's my son right in front of me. throwing massive fits of rage. And of course, I don't know how to deal with it because I was taught that those were bad. I was taught that we don't do that. And so I didn't realize that I'm being dictated by a story of intrinsic memories. What are intrinsic memories? Well, explicit memories are things that you remember, like what happened a half an hour ago. Maybe some of you are like, I'm even struggling with that. But things that you remember just like that, those are explicit memories. Implicit memories are like little filing cabinets. Anyone watch Bruce Almighty way back in the day with Jim Carrey and Morgan Freeman? And there's that part where Jim Carrey goes up in that big white room. He's opening up the file of his life and he opens it up and it's just like, right? The files just come on out. That's like your intrinsic memories. They're buried deep, deep down in your brain. And whether you know them or not, whether you remember them or not, whether you acknowledge them or not, they actually literally dictate the way you see the world and the way you behave and the way you emotionally regulate. And so I'm not saying we have to make sense of everything and go deep into our past, because I think that can sometimes be damaging. But there are things to notice. I had a child who was raging in front of me, and the rage in me was rising up. I needed to understand. I needed to get curious about, why am I finding this so difficult? Why can't I just stand here and just hold the space for him, be the strong pillar, be the support that he needs? Why is that hard for me? And instead of judging myself, I started to get curious. And that's when I started to journal. I journaled every day. Every morning I woke up before my kids woke up. I still do that to this day, and just journaled. And as I started to make sense of my own emotional suitcase, I started to gain peace in my heart. And when my son would react, or when he would send me a nasty text, and to this day, because here's the thing, he's now 15, which is a mental health concern all on its own. Anyone else, teenagers, right? Like, he'll send me stuff, texts that blame me for things, and I don't even react anymore, because peace in my heart translates to peace in my home. And there's such hope for you in this, because as you begin to manage your own emotional suitcase, you're going to be able to pass on a new story to your kids. Now, this is where you're going to wish that I just literally said, like, here are the top 5 ways to manage your child's anxiety and depression. But let me tell you, right now, you could get off of this webinar and you could YouTube that right now. Go ahead, get off and just type in like 5 ways to manage my child's anxiety. You could read blogs about it. You could read scientific articles about it. But the reason why we are all here is because reading things isn't enough. Knowing things isn't enough. We have to learn how to embody these things in order to create the change that we want to see in our kids. And that's why I am calling parents to bravery, a braver road, the road less traveled, which means passing on new stories and having courage to look within ourselves. Dr. Dan Siegel, he's an amazing author. I would recommend you read every book you can on him. He has a book called No Drama Discipline, the best book on discipline I've ever read in my entire life. All the other ones are garbage, in my opinion. And this is based on 25 years of experience. It's a fantastic book. The book that got me through making sense of my story was a book by him, and it's not coming to me right now, but it will but it's fantastic. And he writes, when we don't make sense of our story, our life story becomes written for us, not by us. So I had a choice. I could either be stubborn and I could be like, no, I'm not looking at myself, this child needs to change. No, I'm here to say that the person who changed the most wasn't my son. It was me. I'm the one that had to change. And then I started to see things change with him. But I'll tell you something. I didn't show up in his life holding space for him, sitting there in the room with him. I didn't do that for a week. I didn't do that for a month. I didn't even do that for 6 months. I did that for a year. A year. Because if it took 8 years to wire his brain with me yelling at him and causing him trauma in his neural pathways, which I'll explain in a moment, it was going to take some time to rewire his brain with some new experiences. This is called, and I hope you don't mind me nerding out, but I find this stuff so fascinating and it gives me a lot of hope. It's called interpersonal neurobiology. Attunement rewires the brain. We think that mental health is created by, okay, I'm just going to have my alone time. I'm going to do prayer, I'm meditation, or I'm going to go, out by myself. And there's all kinds of mindfulness talk out there. And those are fantastic. But you know what they're for? Those are all for your own emotional regulation. Those are not going to rewire your brain. Mental health is created socially in connection. And so if you could imagine my fingers as neural pathways, as neural wirings in your brain, those emotional suitcase items, those experiences of your life form neural pathways to come together and fire together. And so good experiences, not so great experiences, traumatic experiences have literally impacted the way you think and impacted the neural pathways in your brain. And so what happens when we know how to be our child's strong pillar, and when we can show up in their lives and just listen to them and embrace emotions and teach them that emotions are not bad. Anxiety is not evil. In fact, it's very helpful. It's an alarm. It says, ding, 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 something's wrong. You should pay attention. And yet we're all just trying to, oh, I feel anxious. Somebody medicate me. And again, I'm not against medication, but we're turning off the alarm. Anxiety prolonged, not paid attention to, yeah, it turns into something quite serious. Same thing with depression. But depression and anxiety alone, those are not bad things. Those were created to make us go, wait a second, something's not quite right. Maybe I should get curious here. And so what happens is we have these neural pathways. And so what I did throughout that year of showing up for my son the same way, what was I building? What was I building in that year of showing up to my son every single day he would blow up and just be the strong pillar? I was creating trust. Safety and trust is what rewires the brain. And literally what would happen is the anxious and depressive wirings in his brain started to come apart, and new neural pathways would start to happen of confidence and courage and the ability to move forward and the ability to reason. That's mind-blowing. That is mind-blowing to me. That can happen with ADHD. That can happen with opposition. That can happen with anxiety and depression. We literally rewire our children's brains by being in connection with them. That's the 80% I'm going to teach you tonight. So yes, if your child needs medication, please do it. If they need counseling, please do it. But again, that's 20%. 80% is the peace in my heart translates to peace in my home. And learning how are we going to rewire our children's brains so that we can write the story instead of the story being written for us. Too many people are reacting. Oh my goodness, my child is anxious, and we react to it. And we're allowing a story and narrative to be written that was never meant to be written for them. One of the things that I realized very quickly with anxious children, depressed children, oppositional children, even children with ADHD is that our typical, at least the typical way I was raised growing up in the 80s, fear, punishment, and control. I mean, that's all I knew. That was what my parents went to. And they were good people, decent people. Fear, man, I had the fear of God for my dad inside of me. Punishment, man, I feel like that was my daily ritual with them. And control, I mean, that's what I would, having control over me. And I didn't realize how much I was using these three strategies, and they don't work. Fear, like I became a monster, how I would yell at my son and it was the anxiety in me. It's like, you are never going to get better. You are never going to get it. And what it was shame. I felt like I wasn't doing a good enough job as a mother. There was one time in the park, my oldest was 5 and my youngest was 2, and my youngest pulls my oldest son's hair, and out comes a really nasty word. And there's 2-year-olds everywhere. And I remember every single mom in the park, all in unison, gasped at the same time. And they glared at my son. But then guess who they glared at next? Me. And inside of myself, I wanted to be like, how dare you, like to avenge the mothers who felt like, what kind of mother allows their son to say words like that? There was punishment. They were expecting punishment. And I even had one lady say, why don't you control your kid? Has anyone ever had that said to you? Or you've heard someone say that to someone else? Here's the interesting thing. I want you to imagine being in a relationship. If you're single, you're in a relationship, just imagine it. Or if you have a partner, just imagine your partner using fear as a way to relate to you. Or punishment. Or just imagine your partner trying to control you just for a moment. I mean, doesn't everybody just feel really like that? It doesn't work. And so I don't know why we think, if it doesn't work for the most intimate human relationships that we have, why on earth do we think that these work with our kids? Fear, punishment, and control are no way to do any human relationship. Here's what's interesting. We teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. And what I didn't realize was that those 8 years where I could not manage my own emotions, I literally was creating a son who couldn't manage his. Now, I'm not blaming myself. And by all means, I'm not telling you that you're the reason your child is suffering. So if you're thinking that, please, I just want to shut that down right now. But I do want to call us a little higher. And you're going to find out why this is neurologically, why it is that we are the ones that create the environment that allows for anxiety or depression to be present. And I'm going to share with you in a moment. But it's interesting, some people will say to me, no, you don't understand. My child has a genetic of anxiety or a genetic of depression. And I'm sure they do. I know in our family, my husband's line in his family, I mean, there's mental illness, there's anxiety, there's bipolar, there's all kinds of stuff. And on my side of the family, there's ADHD and abuse and addiction. And then we get married and have children. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, these children don't have a hope, do they? And so what's interesting is that, yes, you can have a genetic of anxiety and depression, ADHD, whatever it is. And it's like this. But the environment that we create for these children will either blow it out of proportion or keep it right here. And this is why knowledge is not enough. It's not enough for you to read every book on the planet on how to manage your child. In fact, my son would watch me. He watched me read 1, 2, 3 Magic. He watched me read Have a New Kid by Friday. Guess what? I didn't have a new kid by Friday. And he would watch me read all these books seeking to find the secret strategy to what? Change his behavior. And the kids today are just so freaking smart. They're like, I don't want you to control my behavior. I just want you to connect with me. Behavior is communication. This is the second thing I'd like to share. So the first thing in that 80% is that my own emotional regulation, my ability to manage my own anxiety means I can manage someone else's. Peace in my heart translates to peace in my home. Number 2, behavior is communication. So a lot of us, we see an anxious child and we just see the anxiety, or we see someone with suicide ideation and there's certain behaviors that come out. Sometimes they withdraw, sometimes they're angry, whatever it is. Or maybe there's opposition, or ADHD or conduct disorder. And there's all kinds of behaviors going on up here. And we, the adults, are reading books and applying strategies to try to change this, when really it's like an illusion. While this behavior is going on up here, there's something else happening underneath. And that's where the transformation is. But we're just trying to manage this up here, and then we wonder why we hit wall after wall after wall. It's because we're not looking at what's underneath the behavior. So just last year, my son was in grade 9, and for 3 months, he could not get out of bed. And it was interesting because we had him in a special mental health school, a program for anxious kids. And the whole idea around anxiety, and I believe this with all my heart, if you're dealing with strictly anxiety, the only way through anxiety is through it. And often the best strategy for anxiety is called gradual exposure, where it's okay, let's try a little bit today, and then we'll just gradually make that bigger. We'll go a little farther. That's the best way for anxiety. And so this school had a psychologist, it had a behavioral specialist, it had a teacher that understood anxiety. And I'm thinking, this is going to be fantastic for my son. And then around November, he just couldn't get out of bed. And they would just say to me all the time, well, just get him to school. Just get him to school. The anxiousness, he needs to push through it. He needs to get here, and then we can help him. I'm like, yep, okay. But then I couldn't get him there. And week after week, he's in bed, and I'm watching him, and I'm thinking, this isn't avoidance, because he couldn't even get out of bed to play video games with his friends online in the evenings or on weekends. And I'm thinking to myself, no, something's wrong. If it was avoidance, it would be like, I'm so tired, I can't get up, or I'm not feeling well. And then 3 o'clock, suddenly there's a miracle. And it's like, I think I can play with my friends now, right? That is clear avoidance. But no, he couldn't get out of bed for 3 months, even over Christmas holidays. He couldn't get out of bed. He couldn't play with his friends. He was disengaged. He was isolating himself. And I would share this with them. Hey, I actually think there's something else. Yes, we're seeing what we think is anxious behavior, but underneath, I think there's something a lot more going on. And they'd say the same thing to me. Just get him to school. Just get him here. We could work with him once he's here. I'm like, man. And it's interesting. I really, really wish we all would have just been a little bit more curious, because now here we are a year later. He's barely gone to school for grade 10. And now we're realizing, now through me having to be curious for a long time, watching certain behaviors, wondering, is it COVID? Is it the school right now? Is it because kids are on edge? What is going on? A year later, we're realizing that the whole time, it probably wasn't even anxiety. It was his autism. Are you kidding me? We have literally wasted 10 years of this child's education trying to figure him out. But whatever it takes, however long it takes, whatever you need to do to look what's underneath the behavior. Now that we know, we're getting him psychologically assessed. How do we work with a child with autism who's so high functioning, you would never guess he has autism? This is what I'm talking about. And yet what we often do is we're trying shortcuts because we just want to get over it. I just want my kid to go to school. And I'm not against kids going to school, by the way. I think everybody should go to school. I'm actually a public school advocate. I just was talking to a Calgary Board of Education school trustee politician today. So I care about this stuff and I advocate in education, just so y'all know. But it's interesting, I realized that we need to be paying attention. And I said to the principal, I said, look, you can check off your check mark when I get him to school. Great job. We got him to school. And I can check off my good mama box and go, yeah, good job, mom. You got him to school. Meanwhile, he's texting me saying, I feel so trapped. I want to end my life right now. Come get me. I'm feeling like I'm just over the edge. I'm like, who's winning here? Who is winning here? Now, I share all of that with you, that maybe some of you are in very similar places that I am. And it'll take a long time to figure out maybe what's underneath your child's behavior. And it's going to be a long road of you just watching and observing and trying different things. I mean, I took my son to a naturopath. I took him to this. I took him to that. It's going to take a while. For others of you, this is a little extreme. You're like, wow, I'm actually feeling really thankful for my kid right about now. But maybe they're lying. Why are they lying? And we're trying to correct their lying. We're like, oh, that's it. You're grounded. Well, meanwhile, if we could just get to why is Susie lying? And that might just take a day to figure out. That might take a week. And here's the thing, our children are not going to say to us, well, mother, I'm lying because I feel left out at school and I feel like everybody has things that I don't. And I just wish that I could be more like my friends. And I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. Like, they're not going to be able to tell us. And what do we adults do? We sit down and we go, why are you doing this? Well, oftentimes we don't even know why we do certain things. And so what we need to do is we need to become like detectives. Now, I'm not saying not to try to ask questions that pull things out, but we need to do it wisely. We need to do it with a lens of curiosity and with patience. We need to ask questions that maybe aren't so obvious, that we just dive into, that are a little bit deeper. But behavior always tells a story. Underneath anxiety, I have found, working with youth who are anxious, it's usually not anxiety. It's usually something called shame. I'm not enough for this. I don't have what it takes to be around people because I don't feel I'm enough. Therefore, I feel shame. But I'm trying to fix anxiety up here when really what they're feeling is shame. Depression. One of my favorite books on depression is Lost Connections by Johann Hari. He's the gentleman who did the TED Talk. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And he wrote a book called Lost Connections. And he talks about, and he has study after study, research paper after research paper that shows a direct correlation between depression and the lost connection of people in our lives, meaningful work, purpose. I'll tell you what, you want to fix somebody's depression, give them a purpose. Connect them with people who make them feel like they are actually here to mean something, that their life matters and that they can master skills. That's what depression needs. Now, maybe if it's severe, it's probably something else. But I'm just saying, here we are, we're medicating the depression when meanwhile, these kids, I was just in Vancouver 2 weeks ago, first time in a high school in 2.5 years. And after bringing these students through quite a lengthy activity to create psychological safety and bravery, I was finally able to ask this question, hey, what do you want to create? And they looked at me like I was insane. And this is what my son tells me about his friends, and I'm watching our young people. They don't know how to dream right now. They don't know how to create. Finally, one kid, he pipes up and he goes, well, I can tell you what I don't want. I don't want to turn out like my parents. They're miserable. I'm like, man, we adults, we gotta do something to ignite purpose back in our kids. Number 3, you are your child's prefrontal cortex. So again, number 1, peace in my heart translates to peace in my home. Making sense of my story so I can manage my own emotions, so I can manage my child's emotion. Number 2, behavior is communication. Let's stop trying to fix and manage behavior. Let's get to what's underneath. And number 3, you are your child's prefrontal cortex. What does that mean? Well, the back of your brain, which is reactive, which is back here. The opposite is your prefrontal cortex, which is right here. And this is where we problem solve. This is where we're reasonable. This is where we're creative and innovative. And this part of our brain does not get fully developed until we are 25 years old. Do you know what that means? That means that I went through college without a fully developed prefrontal cortex. That explains everything. I mean, how many of you remember you at 21? I was a complete idiot. I can't believe that I'm alive. And so we think, our kids, they're struggling. They're not doing well. They don't know how to be creative. They don't know how to manage their emotions. They literally don't even have this developed yet. Now, that doesn't mean that we let them off the hook and go, well, I guess just bunker down till they're 25. I'm not saying that. There's ways to develop the creativity in our kids again. There's ways to develop emotional regulation in our kids again, which is their prefrontal cortex. So how do we do that? Two ways. Number one, repetition. How many times do I have to tell you? Has anyone ever asked that as a parent? You've asked your child, how many times do I have to tell you? Well, that's how they learn. Repetition, over and over again. You see this hair? Yeah, this is not blonde, my friends. This is not blonde. This is the cost of developing my boy's prefrontal cortex, okay? How many times do I have to tell you? But number two, actually three things. Number two is through empathy. So if our child is in the back of their brain, which means they're reactive, which means they're in fight, or they're in flight, or they're just frozen, they're reactive, they're lashing out, or they're withdrawing. The only way, friends, the only way you bring anybody, kids, teens, you, your spouse, your boss, your grandmother, the only way we get somebody from the back of their brain back to being able to be reasonable is through empathy. What's empathy? It's sitting there with them and acknowledging how they feel in that moment. And that's why me sitting there in the living room with my son, throwing his fit of rage, was so crucially important. It meant that I could sit there and say, I acknowledge how you're feeling. And it's interesting, you know, when I first started, when he first came back from the hospital, I mean, sometimes these things would last for like 3 hours. But, you know, by the end of that year, you know, all I would have to do if he was kind of like, right? All I'd have to do is just like sit with him for a moment. And I mean, I feel like within 3 minutes, we were done. And sometimes I would be able to say like, hey, I can see you're really frustrated. And he'd tell me if he was frustrated, he'd say, yes. Or if he wasn't, he would certainly let me know. I'm not frustrated. I'm angry. Okay. And so what we don't understand sometimes is that emotions are in that tornado that I was talking about in the beginning. And as soon as you name an emotion, you tame it. That's from Dr. Dan Siegel. And the only way to bring someone back here is to acknowledge them in how they're feeling. I mean, think about yourself. I feel like if we can remember how we feel, it can help. You know, I think about myself just like, right? Like, I don't know, you know, if any other women I don't know what it's like to be a guy, but you know, the women on the call, like I'm just losing my mind. And, you know, my husband comes up and it's like, you know, he says something like, calm down. How many of you like just know exactly what's about to go down? I mean, it's not going to be pretty. I mean, like, you haven't seen nothing yet. But if my husband comes up to me and says, wow, like I can see you're really, something's really wrong. I'm here. Tell me more. Like those types of statements. I mean, it just brings us down. But the emotion doesn't go down, and we don't come back to the prefrontal cortex in the time that is set by us. So, you know, I could be like, okay, Connie said in that seminar, empathy. Okay, my child's freaking out. I'm going to be like, so I can see that you're really upset right now. And like 10 minutes later, you're like, why is this not working? Because it's not based on a time limit. It's not based on my agenda. And they can sense that. How many of you have sensed when somebody else has an agenda? They don't have to say anything because 90% of our communication is what? Non-verbal. So my agenda comes out very, very easily in my body language. And so we want to truly be empathetic, which basically means connecting with our kids at all costs. Just connect with them. Don't try to fix them. Don't try to, you know, tell them, well, you know, maybe if you just were a little bit more kind to Susie, she wouldn't freak out at you. Like, just like, let's leave the advice. Let's just listen. So the first way we develop our child's prefrontal cortex is through repetition. You're in this for the long haul. 25 is a long ways away for some of you, and for the rest of us, well, it's 10 years away. Yes, come on, we can do this, right? But we're in this for the long haul. Number two, empathy. And that's something that you will do with every human being that you meet. This is basically being a good human 101. All right. And number three, the third way you develop your child's prefrontal cortex is through your own emotional regulation. So our kids are watching us at all times, especially when they're little, but even when they're older. It's very interesting, sometimes I would watch my son, in a meltdown. I'd be like, that looks a lot like, that sounds like me. Oh my goodness, I'm literally watching myself right now. And I didn't realize that I was forming the prefrontal cortex. Oh, this is how we deal when we're with anger. This is how we deal with when we're upset. This is like my mom used to slam kitchen doors, right? Slam, 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 slam. You okay, mom? I'm fine. Slam, 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 slam. And so I learned, oh, that's how we deal with our negative emotions. Just slam, 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 slam. So I used to do that when my husband and I first got married. Drove him nuts. We are developing our child's prefrontal cortex and the ability to reason by how we manage our emotions. And even during COVID, all the kids, they were watching us, they're looking up, they're going, how are the adults doing in this pandemic? And they watched us. Okay, I guess that's how I should feel too, because of the mirror neurons. And we are the adults, whether we like it or not. We are the leaders. We're the ones that they are looking to. I don't know who told me, who gave me a certificate that said that I could adult. I don't know when that happened. I don't feel capable. I don't feel qualified, but here we are. We are the adults. We set the standard. We set the tone. We are the culture creators. We are the creators of brains. No big deal, right? Just another Friday. Like I'm telling you, we have got a huge responsibility, but also a great opportunity, because that means that no matter what I've done in the past, and this is what gave me a lot of hope, I developed my son's prefrontal cortex by yelling at him for 8 years, but I am developing a whole new prefrontal cortex by knowing how to manage my emotions. And at first it was so messy. Oh my goodness, friends, if I could show you, it was just so messy. I remember there were some times I would be so angry because anger was like my emotion. And anger is a bodyguard, by the way. Anger is usually guarding something else, like fear or despair or sadness. It's really hard to get past the gate of anger to actually feel sad. And so I remember there was one time, I forget what happened. And I was like, oh, in front of my family, I'm like, I know I look so angry right now, but what I actually feel is so sad. I couldn't get there. I couldn't get to sadness, but I had to explain, I had to verbally process so that they would understand I'm not angry. I'm really sad. And it's so interesting watching my 15-year-old now. If there's anything I can say about him, as much as he still is in a struggle, because now we're working on a whole other level, we're figuring out his autism, we're in a whole new brave frontier. But one thing I can say about that kid is he is so self-aware. And I would never say that that's because of me, but I would say that him watching somebody learn how to manage their emotions has allowed him to learn how he manages emotions. Number 4, you are your child's dope. So the first one was peace in my heart translates to peace in my home. Number 2, behavior is communication. Number 3, you are your child's prefrontal cortex. And number 4, you are your child's dope. What is that? You remember, I don't know, any children of the 80s, we used to say, yeah, it's dope. Right? It's short for dopamine, a chemical, a hormone that gets released in our body. But what's interesting is that it's also another word for marijuana. That's what it was for before. And it's interesting, a lot of parents will come up to me and ask me, what do I do about my child who's smoking marijuana? And I'd be like, We need to light up so they don't need to go light up. What do I mean by that? Well, it's interesting. Every child, no matter who they are, no matter what background they come from, no matter what racial background they come from, economic, education does not matter. In fact, can I even just say it's not even bound by age? It's something that we all need in our lives. And it's this idea that, am I a delight? Am I a delight or am I a burden? And when I don't feel like I'm a delight to my parents, Brene Brown says that not belonging in our families is the worst hurt. It causes more pain than anything else in the human experience, not belonging in our homes. So when children don't feel like they're a delight, and I'll tell you, the kids that are falling through the cracks, the kids who are struggling mentally, they know what kind of turmoil they're putting their family through. And that shame will come out in behaviors like, screw you, mom, I don't care about you, or withdrawing. But what they really feel is that they feel like, man, I'm putting my family through hell. They need to know that they're a delight. We need to know that we are a delight. When we feel like we're a burden, we become the worst versions of ourselves. We become that side of ourselves that we don't even like. But when we know that we're a delight, there's a part of us that opens up where we can become. We can become who we truly are. And that's what happens when we light up, when we see our kids. And I'm not saying that when our kids have done wrong, that we're like, oh, you're just such a delight. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that our kids need to know that we love them. And intentionality, like I love my kids, they know that, but do they? We can say, I love you all we want. We can have beautiful plaques on our wall that says everyone belongs in this house. But if the person next to me doesn't feel it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't count for anything. It has to be felt, not just said, and not just intended in our hearts and minds. And so our kids, when they wake up in the morning, it's like, oh, hey. And when we come home from work, like, hey, big hug, good night. Those are natural moments where we can light up. And when they do something where they're strong, one of the things that I work at a company called Flourishing, and it's this whole new psychology and science that actually challenges the idea of resilience. For about 25 years, I have preached resilience. We need to be resilient. We need to help our kids be resilient. And Flourishing challenges that and says that resilient is actually a subpar status quo goal. I mean, do we really want to be resilient only? I mean, if you're still here after 2 years of a pandemic, you are resilient. You've made it. You have bounced back from adversity. You might feel like you're barely hanging on, but you're still here. That's resilience. The resilience is the ability to bounce back after hard things, but you can be resilient and miserable. That's the thing. Whereas flourishing, this concept of flourishing, is that you can actually flourish and thrive in your life despite obstacles, despite setbacks, despite the things. It's moving people to something that's far greater than just mere bouncing back from adversity. And so I work for this company that literally works in the psychology and science of flourishing, and I love it. And this is the one thing we believe, that strength-based resilience, strength-based, not what's wrong with you, but what's strong in you. And if I focus on my own strengths, and I'm not oblivious to my weaknesses, I'm not oblivious to where I need to improve, but if I can focus on where I am strong, strength will beget strength. And I've seen this in kids. You call out a strength in a child, they're going to rise up to it. What we speak, they become. Words create, don't they? I remember I was in this school and we used to do this activity called I See You. And there was a bunch of grade 5 students and we're in this circle, and I called out this one grade 5 boy and he goes into the middle of the circle. And the idea is that they stand in the circle while other kids and teachers call out the strength that they see in them. Very vulnerable exercise, to be honest. And I remember bringing him in the middle, and this one girl goes, "He's the bully." I'm like, oh dear, somebody else say something quick. And another kid pipes up, "He's the bully." And then a third kid, "He's the bully." And so I look over at the teacher, like, "Help me out here." She's like, "Oh no, he's the bully." I'm like, what is going on? And it was a beautiful teachable moment, because I was able to say, hey, you just set a bar for this kid. You call him a bully, guess what? That's all he's probably ever going to be, because that's all you see in him. But if you could see strength in the prickliest child, if you could see strength where there is anxiety in someone, if you could see even just the ounce of strength, I promise you that person will start to live up to that bar. And it was beautiful. After that, kids started to call out things that were sincere. And that kid, he went from like this in the circle to walking out with his head held high. I remember once my son said to me, it was just, we were on our way to the counseling session, and he says, I'm not brave, Mom, I'm a coward. I said, Ben, you have overcome more than what most 9-year-olds have ever overcome. You are brave. Our kids need to hear what we really believe about them. They need to hear it through text. They need to hear it in writing, in encouragement cards. They need to hear it come out of our mouths. They need to feel it from us, because that strength, when we call out strength, it calls to more strength. It's important. Number 5, if you have felt at any moment in tonight where you're like, wow, I have messed this kid up. I know I have certainly felt like I'd read these books and I'd be like, man, I have just missed the mark. I'll pay for their counseling later. But this is powerful. This gives a lot of hope. The idea that resilience in our kids, now I'm talking about the kind of resilience where they can flourish, the kind of resilience where, yeah, they've bounced back from adversity, but they keep moving forward. Resilience is in how we repair. It's not by getting our parenting perfect. In fact, there's a beautiful statistic in resilience that says I only, as a parent, need to get this parenting thing right about 30% of the time for my kid to make it. 30%. That's beautiful. You know what that means? That's better than I did in math. This is fantastic news for you and I. It means that the mess is and the madness is actually creating more beauty than the perfection. Our kids need to see us wrestling through, how do we resolve conflict? How do we come back after a fight? They need to see us repairing our lives. If there's one thing my boys can't say, they cannot say that their mom has not worked very hard on herself. They can't say that me and my husband have not worked very hard on our marriage. They have seen things that I never saw as a kid. I never saw my parents struggle in their relationship. I never saw them struggle personally. And I wish I would have. I wish I would have seen the positive. Hey, we're going to work this out. I'm committed to my own personal growth. I'm committed to my mental health. Every single morning, check this out. I want to show you this because this thing has been amazing. There's this app called the Neurocycle app. It's by a neuroscientist, Dr. Carolyn Leaf. And what she does over 21 days is she helps you take a toxic thought, deconstruct it, and construct it into something useful, positive, and strength-based. I've done 4 cycles of that. And I'll tell you, I do that every morning. They watch me. I'm on that app. It takes 15 minutes, helps me journal. I'll tell you, this is how I know it works. Last year, I neurocycled something around my personal inner world of food, lost 30 pounds. Tell me this app does not work. And I'm not here to sell an app, but I'm just telling you that there's resources out there that can help with mind management, where we can start showing our kids that I am not ever going to stop learning as an adult. Yeah, I have messed things up, but look at me. I'm trying to make my life better. They need to see that. That's going to make them go, okay, when hard times hit, I see how I can work that out with my spouse. I see how I can manage my own mind and control what I can control, which is me. They're going to see that. And that's going to give them a lot of hope and tools to make it when things get hard. But resilience is also in how we repair with them when there's been an argument or a rupture, which we had so many. Because my son, I mean, even to this day, you know, he storms out. I mean, some of it's his teenage normalcy, some of it's his autism, some of it's because we're waiting for, you know, certain help. And when there's a rupture, you know, we've really learned how to resolve it. And I would highly recommend when there's a rupture to just allow things to simmer. I don't know if anyone else is out there that's like me. I like to resolve things right now. Everybody's in the heightened emotions, and there's mom going, we're going to work this out. Meanwhile, we're all yelling at each other. Like nobody's happy, right? It's good to just say, hey, let's take 5. Let's take some time. We don't need to solve this right now. Walk away, come back. And it's so important for the child to see us modeling that we go to them. We do not make them come and wallow to us. Well, you better say sorry to your mother. You hurt my feelings. Even if my children hurt my feelings, even if they're wrong, whatever's happened, I am going to be the initiator because I'm the leader. And this is what leaders do. They lead. And whether we want to or not, as parents, we're leaders. I'm going to go up to my child. And it doesn't mean I'm saying sorry, because sometimes I got nothing to say sorry for. But I am going to say, that was really hard, wasn't it? I'd love to chat about this with you when you're ready. That's it. That's repair. Repair doesn't mean apologies. Repair means I care more about connecting with you than I care about being correct or right. It's powerful. Think about that. I want to encourage you that your family's future is yours to write. We do not need to wait around for the government to figure out how to make our mental health care system work. In fact, friends, no one's coming to rescue us right now because everywhere things are breaking down. But your family's future is yours to write. I have watched my son walk out of depression, anxiety, suicide ideation by literally showing up with these tools every single day. And maybe it seems complicated, maybe it seems easy, but this is neuroscience. This is how we rewire brains. And is it messy? You bet. Is it going to take long? Yes, it is. Are you going to have a new kid by Friday? No, you won't. And that's what we need to rebel against, friends. We need to rebel against this idea that I want my McDonald's fix for my child's mental health. I want to go through the drive-through. I want to pick up the solution that's going to fix them. And by the time I roll out of that drive-through, everything's better. We do not live in that world. We're human beings having a human experience. But I will tell you that there's so much hope for your child. Now, in the midst of all of it, I want to share with you a couple of self-care strategies that helped me and continue to help me. But first, I need to have a sip of this water. Look at this. I'm only at 3 p.m. I got some work to do. So self-care, if you're ever in a place where your child is suffering, you have got to put on your own oxygen mask first. I know that for me, the temptation is to sacrifice and give up everything about myself in order to help my family. And yes, there is a resolve to do that. But we have to take the lead. We have to be the leaders. We are the culture creators. And so here are some strategies to help you with your self-care. And it does not involve a manicure or reading a book by a nice fire. When I was in crisis, there were no bubble baths, but this is what there was. We all have two aspects of our life. There's things that we can control, and there's things that we can't control. And for every controllable in our life, we need an action plan. And so what I do sometimes, and even to this day, I still do this, but I'll write down on a sheet of paper controllables on one side and action on the other. Or I can't see that. So on one side of the paper, I'm going to write down every single thing that I can control in my life. And you know what? If you do that, you're probably going to maybe at first draw a blank, because right now it can feel like a lot of things are out of our control. But I will say that I can control my mindset. I can control my schedule to a certain degree. I can control what I watch on the news. I can control what I listen to. I can control my emotions. Those are all things that I can control inside of me. And for every single one of those, I need an action plan. So how am I going to manage my mindset? Well, for me, it's that neurocycle. Every single morning, I'm doing mind management, and that's helping with my emotional regulation. I'm working out every morning before my children wake up so that when they get up and they're in a mood, I'm ready for them because I've done my inner work. I'm ready for whatever life throws at me that day. I'm not reacting, I'm responding. So for every controllable, I need an action plan. Second step is to write down on one side non-controllables. And for every non-controllable, I need a coping plan. Because how many of you know you can't control uncontrollables? So uncontrollables could be things like inflation. It could be my job getting laid off. It could be gas prices. It could be the fact that my child is anxious, won't go to school, and now I'm having to call into work. You know, I can't go in. It could be the fact that my child won't get out of bed. It could be the fact that my spouse and I are arguing about the approach of how we're going to work with our child's mental health. Like, these are uncontrollables. And so for every uncontrollable, I need a coping plan. A coping plan. How am I going to cope with what I can't control? And my coping plan might be simple things like I just need to breathe when I start getting a little bit like, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do about that? I just need to breathe. Or when my child, a coping plan for me, when my son would lash out at me, and I don't mean physically, I mean like with words, I'd be like, you know what? I'm just going to walk away. And if he follows me, I'm literally going to walk out of my house. Like, you know, the patterns of your life. And the worst thing that can happen, like some people go, well, it didn't work. It didn't work for me. I'm like, try something else. Like, aren't we inventive? Like, I'll tell you, for every non-controllable I have written with a coping plan, I have had to retry and retry coping plan after coping. That didn't work. Well, that didn't work. Well, that didn't work. Back to the drawing board. Back to the drawing board, friends. We just have to keep trying. And if that just means breathing or surrendering, because a lot of this journey with our kids that are struggling, it's ambiguous. I'll be really honest. One of my worst fears is that I do all of this work. What if my son one day decides to end his life? I have to think about that often because he's 15 and he has struggled, and we're waiting. Right now, we're waiting for help, and he doesn't understand his autism, and he hasn't been able to go to school, and he's finding some real things really hard. And there are days he's texted me. He's like, Mom, like, I don't know if this is worth it. And that feels so uncontrollable to me. If you ask me, are you doing everything in your power to prevent that? Friends, I can tell you with utmost confidence, you bet I am. You ask anyone that knows me well, they'll tell you I am. But there's that ambiguity. What if my daughter goes in the closet again and cuts again? What if my son decides to make a decision that I'm just like, oh dear? That's the ambiguity that we have to wrestle with. And it's not easy. And my coping plan is to keep advocating and to every night before I go to bed, I say to him, son, if you need me in the middle of the night, you wake me up. Like if you need anything. And, my son has said to me in the last year, he says, Mom, it's your love for me that keeps me alive. It's your love for me that keeps me going. And that moves my heart. But I just think to myself, well, I want that to be enough. And I need some answers right now. So my coping plan is to continue to do all I can, but to also understand that sometimes our kids make decisions. I had a lady, and this is going to be a great promo for this seminar right here, but I had a lady in Kelowna whose son decided to end his life, and she took this seminar about 3 years ago. And she messages me all the time, you need to do better because my son ended his life. What you do doesn't work. And here's the thing, friends, if I ever think, and if I ever have the type of pride to think that 2 hours with you, not even seeing your faces, and with her in Kelowna for 2 hours is going to change the world, I think that might be a little prideful. I actually approach this seminar with a lot of humility. And it's about, what are you going to do with it? Number one, you've got to do something with this. This is what I am doing, and I continue to do faithfully. And I'm not in control of what ends up happening and what you do. That is an uncontrollable. And my coping plan is I understand that I hold the results with an open hand. But I want to let you know I'm right there with you. All I know is that this has worked for 98% of people that I work with. I have one woman in 5 years, and I don't even understand what happened with her son. I don't know. Here's the deal. We just have to continue. We just have to be brave. In the midst of the darkest part of our mental, like our mess with our son, our crisis when he was 8, I remember writing a mantra. I wrote this. I wrote, I am brave. I show up when it's hard. I love without walls. I forgive when it hurts. And I rise through the storm. And I didn't feel that at all. I was in the pit of hell at that moment, but I wrote it anyways. And I continue to speak it over my life. I am brave. I show up when it's hard. I love without walls. I forgive when it hurts. And I rise through the storm. And now try to convince me that I'm not brave. I'm willing to show up when it's hard. I love as much as I can without walls. I forgive my boys when it hurts. And I continue to rise through the storm. And I want to speak that over you. You are brave. Keep showing up when it's hard. Keep loving without walls. Keep forgiving when it hurts. And you're going to rise through the storm. And so I want to just show you this. If you want to stay in touch, take a screenshot of that. If you want to give any feedback or questions, I'm going to take questions in a moment if you have them. But I know sometimes, the nature of this talk, some people just like to message privately, which is totally fine. If you liked the seminar, you can message me. If you didn't, you can message Josh. No, it's just a joke. I try to joke. These are my social handles. You can follow those just to stay in touch. But what I'd love to do is take a moment and just see if anyone has any questions, because I would love to take them. You can write it in the chat, or you can unmute, or however, Josh, however you would like to run that. I'd love to take some time.
Yeah, well, thank you again, Connie, that was a great presentation. Learned so much, and it's really good. Again, for those watching online after, if you have any questions, you can definitely send those either my way, or you can reach out to Connie through those social media handles, or her email, I think was on there as well. There was one here. What was the name of the app that you mentioned?
Oh, so it's called the Neurocycle app. And I'll just write that in the chat, Dr. Carolyn Leaf. And it's fantastic. Now, it does cost a little bit of money, like $20, but it's worth it.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to type those in either the chat or the Q&A box. We'll give it a couple minutes here. Yeah, I had one, Connie. Yeah, I'm studying a lot of the stuff with my schooling, with my master's of counseling that I'm doing on the side. And you mentioned Dr. Gordon Neufeld. I was just in a class a couple weeks ago where his daughter was actually teaching our class, and yeah, it was great. She mentioned a lot of his books. Can you comment a little bit more on just your work with him and what you've learned from him?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love Dr. Gordon Neufeld. He really talks a lot about connection and attunement. Um, you're probably learning a little bit about attachment theory, this idea that like literally it rewires the brain. And so this book, Hold On to Your Kids, I love how he takes complex things that Josh is learning in his master's, and he makes it so that anyone can understand. When we connect with our kids, they feel safe, and safety and trust then brings out this ability to relax in the mind, relax in the body, that they can become. And I love his work on oppositional defiance disorder, calling it counter will. It just reframes it so that we're connecting with them on a bit of a more positive level than, you know, negative.
Yeah. Um, yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free again to type those in. I'm sure more will come with the recording as people watch it later.
For
Um,
sure. I do have a little free book if anyone wants to download it. It's How to Bring Hurting Kids Closer. If anyone, that resource can help you. You just click that link as well. I just put it in the chat.
awesome. That's a big water bottle.
Hmm. Yes, it is.
Awesome. Are we okay to put that up on the recording on the website as well, that book, or just for the chat?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Okay.
Please feel free. Yeah. I actually have a book called Bring Them Closer as well, if you choose to put that on there as well.
Sure, we can put that on. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing currently any questions. There's some comments coming in that people are saying thank you. Uh, yeah. So with that, I think we'll probably maybe end a bit early. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out again. Connie, do you have an email that people could reach out as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just putting that in the chat as well. It's Connie@wellnessinnovate.com.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And just for you guys watching live and then also on the recording, we will be kind of taking a pause for the summer on the hub stuff, but we will be continuing it again in the fall. So we'll be doing more seminars. We're doing some more tutoring for kids. And we would love your feedback on this year on these seminars and what's been going on. I have a community kind of assessment survey we're doing for the church and community this summer. So if you guys are interested in that, just you can send me a message and I can send that to you. And yeah, we're just trying to get feedback on how we can improve this for next year. It's kind of cool. All the final numbers came in. We had about 1,100 touch points with people outside the church or in the community, including the church, sorry, and the community through the whole program, which was really cool. Just through the power of technology and COVID, it was amazing to see that come to fruition this last year through the program. So yeah, thanks again, Connie, for your time. It was great. Great way to finish off the year for us here. And we want to, yeah, just thank you again. So
Oh, you're so welcome.
yeah. Okay. Well, take care and have a great night.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. See ya.